He was a reclusive and ruthless tycoon, embittered by a family betrayal. She, a young pregnant woman, abandoned and thrown out onto the street with nowhere to go. On a stormy night, he finds her helpless in front of his mansion, and the sight of her vulnerability strikes him deeply. In a shocking impulse, he rescues her, takes her in, and to her disbelief, proposes marriage. What begins as an act of protection and a marriage of convenience blossoms into an unexpected dance of love and redemption as the arrival of the baby melts his cold armor. Watch this story to the end. You'll be surprised. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel, leave your comments. We post videos like this every day. Continuing, the rain hammered against the windows of Nicholas Valmont's mansion with a fury that mirrored the storm that had become his life. At 39, he commanded a hotel empire that stretched across the United States. But on that Tuesday night, alone in his study, he felt like a castaway in his own home. The Carrara marble walls and imported mahogany furniture couldn't fill the void that had consumed him since discovering the betrayal of his younger brother, Ethan, who had conspired with rival investors to try and bring down his company and steal the family legacy. Nicholas turned away from the window and poured himself a 20-year-old scotch, watching the amber liquid swirl in the crystal. His reputation as a cold and calculating man wasn't merely a facade. It was his armor against a world that had taught him that trusting was synonymous with vulnerability. Ethan's betrayal hadn't just threatened his business. It had shattered the last vestige of faith he still held in humanity. Across town in Queens, Clara Davis shoved her last possessions into a torn plastic garbage bag, tears mingling with the rain that began to seep into the small back room where she'd lived for the past 3 years. At 26, she had dedicated her life to caring for others, first for her younger siblings after the death of their parents, then for the Sterling family, where she worked as a housekeeper. Her 7-month pregnancy was already visible beneath her soaked uniform, a constant reminder of how Ryan, her boyfriend, had disappeared the moment she needed him most. "You've brought shame to this house," Mrs. Sterling had screamed hours earlier, her face contorted with disgust. "A pregnant housekeeper. What will the neighbors think? Take your things and get out, now." Clara had tried to explain, had begged for a few more days until she found another place, but the door had slammed in her face with a bang that still echoed in her ears. Now, in the torrential rain, she carried her entire life in 2 bags and felt the first Braxton Hicks contractions tightening her womb. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her siblings had been placed in different foster homes after she lost her previous job, and the little money she had managed to save had been spent on doctor's appointments. Walking through the deserted streets of the upscale neighborhood, Clara felt the weight of hopelessness in every step. Her legs trembled with cold and exhaustion when she spotted the imposing gates of a mansion that rose like a castle in the storm. The golden lights that escaped from the windows seemed like a beacon in the darkness of her life. With no strength to continue, she collapsed on the sidewalk in front of the gates, leaning against the stone wall while protecting her belly with her arms. "Please, God," she whispered, her voice lost in the roar of the storm. "I don't ask for myself, but for my baby. He's done nothing wrong." Nicholas was about to head upstairs to his suite when a strange sound cut through the silence of the night. It wasn't just the wind, but something different, almost like a moan. Frowning, he went to the security system and activated the external cameras. The image that appeared on the screen stopped him short. A young woman, visibly pregnant, was sitting in front of his gates, completely soaked and trembling violently. For a moment, Nicholas hesitated. His nature told him to call security and resolve the situation practically and distantly. But there was something in the woman's posture, in the way she protected her womb, with a desperate tenderness that awakened a compassion he thought he had buried forever. Perhaps it was the memory of his own mother, who had faced so many difficulties to protect him when he was a child. Perhaps it was just the humanity that still existed in some forgotten corner of his heart. Before he could reconsider, Nicholas grabbed a coat and ran out into the rain. Clara looked up, startled, when she heard the gates opening and saw a male figure approaching. She tried to get up, but her legs failed her. "Don't move," Nicholas said, his deep voice cutting through the noise of the storm. "Are you hurt?" Clara shook her head, unable to speak, as Nicholas watched her with an intensity that made her feel even more vulnerable. His dark eyes seemed to see through her soul, but there was no cruelty in them, just genuine surprise, as if he also couldn't believe what was happening. "Come," he said finally, extending his hand. "You can't stay here." Clara hesitated for an eternal moment, studying the face of the stranger offering his help. Even in the rain, she could perceive the natural elegance in his movements, the expensive quality of his clothes, the bearing of someone used to being obeyed. He was the kind of man who, under normal circumstances, wouldn't even notice her existence. "I can't accept," she murmured, trying once again to get up on her own. "You don't know me. I could be dangerous, or... The only thing dangerous here is you dying of pneumonia on my sidewalk." Nicholas interrupted her with a dryness that was more practical than cruel. Without waiting for further protests, he wrapped his coat around her and helped her to her feet, feeling the fragility of her bones beneath the soaked clothes. Clara allowed herself to be led through the immaculate gardens to the main entrance of the mansion, her eyes widening at the opulence that surrounded her. Crystal chandeliers, marble staircases, paintings that probably cost more than she would earn in a lifetime. It was like being transported to another world, a world where people like her only entered to clean and serve. "Sit down," Nicholas ordered, guiding her to a leather armchair in the living room. "I'll call a doctor." "No!" The word came out louder than Clara intended. "Please, sir." "I can't afford a doctor. I just need to dry off and rest a little, then I'll leave." Nicholas stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. There was something about the way she said, "sir," that bothered him, an automatic deference that spoke of a lifetime of being treated as inferior. "What's your name?" "Clara. Clara Davis." She kept her eyes downcast, her hands clasped over her womb. "And the child's father?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Nicholas felt a familiar stab of anger towards men who abandoned their responsibilities, an anger that came from old memories of his own absent father. "How long have you been on the street?" he asked, his voice softening involuntarily. "A few hours." Clara finally raised her eyes, and Nicholas found himself momentarily thrown off balance by the purity of her gaze. There was no bitterness there, despite everything she had obviously been through. There was fear, yes, and sadness, but also a quiet strength that intrigued him. "I used to work for a family, but when they found out about the baby..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Nicholas knew well the hypocrisy of upper-class families. He had grown up among them, watching how they treated employees like disposable objects. "Do you have family? Anyone who can help you?" Clara shook her head, biting her lower lip to hold back tears. "My siblings were adopted when I lost my previous job. I don't have anyone anymore." Something in Nicholas's chest constricted unexpectedly. He recognized that loneliness, that feeling of being completely alone in the world. But there was a crucial difference between them. He had chosen his solitude as protection. She had been forced into hers. "You're staying here tonight," he decided abruptly. "Tomorrow we'll see what to do." "I can't accept that," Clara protested, trying to get up. "What will people think? A single man, a pregnant woman? It's not right." Nicholas almost smiled at the irony. "Believe me, Miss Davis, my reputation has survived much worse scandals." His expression hardened. "And as for what people think, that has never stopped me from doing what I deem necessary." There was something in the way he spoke, a natural authority mixed with a subtle bitterness that made Clara realize she was facing a man accustomed to facing adversity. She nodded reluctantly, aware that she had no choice. Nicholas called Maria, the housekeeper who lived on the property, and instructed her to prepare one of the guest rooms, while Clara took a warm shower and put on dry clothes that Maria had provided. He locked himself in his study, trying to understand the inexplicable impulse that had led him to bring a stranger into his home. Later, when he brought tea and some cookies to the room, he found Clara standing in front of the window, watching the gardens illuminated by the moon that had finally appeared between the clouds. She had combed her brown hair, which now fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and the borrowed nightgown highlighted the delicacy of her features. For a moment, Nicholas allowed himself to really see her, not as a problem to be solved, but as a woman, a beautiful woman, he admitted reluctantly. "Better?" he asked, placing the tray on the small table. "Much better. Thank you." Clara turned around, and their eyes met for an instant that seemed to stretch beyond what was necessary. "I don't know how to thank you for—" "Nicholas," he corrected her, "and you don't need to thank me. Any decent person would do the same." Clara shook her head gently. "No, Mr. Nicholas. I went to many houses today, knocked on many doors. You were the only one who opened." Something in the honest simplicity of her words struck Nicholas unexpectedly. He found himself studying her face, the soft curve of her neck, the way she unconsciously caressed her womb. There was a natural femininity in her gestures that awakened sensations he had deliberately suppressed for years. "Rest," he said abruptly, heading for the door. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what to do next." But as he was almost leaving, Clara's soft voice stopped him. "Mr. Nicholas, why did you help me?" "Really?" Nicholas stopped, his hand on the doorknob. It was a simple question, but one that demanded an answer he wasn't sure he was ready to give. He turned around slowly. "Maybe," he said finally, "because I recognized someone who was betrayed by people they trusted." Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. Clara felt something stir in her chest, not just gratitude, but an inexplicable connection with that enigmatic man who had appeared in her life like an unlikely guardian angel. The next day, Nicholas woke up with a determination that surprised him. During breakfast, he watched Clara eat with the appetite of someone who hadn't eaten properly for days, and made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "I have a proposition for you," he said, placing his coffee cup on the saucer with a soft clink. "A proposition that may seem unbelievable, but that will solve both of our problems." Clara looked up, a spoonful of oatmeal suspended in the air. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you right," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. "Marry me." The oatmeal slipped from Clara's spoon and fell back into the bowl with a muffled sound. She blinked several times, as if trying to process words that made no sense at all. Sorry. I didn't understand correctly," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. Nicholas maintained his impassive expression, although internally he was questioning his own sanity. The proposal had slipped from his lips before he could filter the thought, but now that the words were in the air, he realized that it made sense in a bizarre and practical way. "You heard correctly," he said, leaning slightly forward. "A marriage of convenience. You need stability, a respectable name for your child, financial security. I need—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Let's just say I need a wife who has no ulterior motives regarding my fortune. Someone who understands that this is a mutually beneficial arrangement." Clara stared at him as if he had completely lost his mind. "Mr. Nicholas, you don't know me. I could be anything, anyone." "You're right. I don't know you," he agreed with a disconcerting calm. "But I know what I saw last night. A woman willing to face a storm to protect her child. A woman who refuses to accept charity without questioning her own limitations. That tells me more about your character than years of social interaction." The following days unfolded like a strange and surreal dream. Clara remained at the mansion while trying to process the impossible proposal, and Nicholas found himself observing the small rituals of her presence. The way she thanked Maria for every kindness, how she cared for the plants on the balcony, how she spoke softly to the baby in her belly. It was during one of these observations, on the third day, that Nicholas found her in the library, carefully leafing through a book of poetry by Emily Dickinson. She was bent awkwardly over the volume, one hand supporting her aching pregnant back. "You like poetry?" he asked, entering the room silently. Clara startled, closing the book quickly. "Sorry, I shouldn't touch your books without permission." "Answer the question," he said, approaching and sitting in the armchair next to hers. Yes, I like it a lot." Her cheeks flushed slightly. "My mom taught me to read with poetry books she borrowed from the public library. She said beautiful words could make any situation more bearable." Nicholas studied her delicate profile as she spoke. "And what happened to her?" "Cancer. When I was 18, Clara ran her fingers over the cover of the book. My dad had died 2 years before in a work accident. I was the only one left to take care of my twin brothers, Michael and Raphael. They were only 12. "That's why you stopped studying?" It wasn't a question, and Clara nodded. "I was in my senior year of high school. I wanted to go to college for education. But the kids needed food and shelter, so I got a job as a housekeeper." She smiled with a soft sadness. "I don't regret it. My brothers were everything to me." "Were?" Clara's face contorted with pain. "When I lost my previous job, the boss fired me because he found out I was dating Ryan, said romantic relationships compromised work efficiency." She laughed bitterly. "I went 3 months without being able to find another job. I couldn't pay the rent for the small apartment where we lived. Child Protective Services. They thought it would be best if Michael and Raphael went to different foster homes. They said I wasn't fit to raise them." Nicholas felt something tighten in his chest. "Do you see them?" "No." The word came out as a broken whisper. "The foster families thought it would be less confusing for them if they cut off contact with me completely. I don't even know where they are now." The silence that followed was heavy, with a mutual understanding of pain. Nicholas stood up abruptly and walked to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. "My brother Ethan and I were raised here in this house," he said finally, his voice low and controlled. "After the death of our parents, when I was 16 and he was 14. A car accident." Clara watched him, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "I took over the family business at 21. I worked 16 hours a day to turn my father's small company into this empire. Ethan was always everyone's favorite. Charming, sociable, loved by the media. I was the difficult brother, the workaholic who didn't smile for the cameras." He turned to face her, and Clara saw a vulnerability in his eyes that he was trying to disguise with coldness. 3 months ago, I discovered that Ethan was passing confidential information to our main competitors. Not only that, he was orchestrating a campaign to remove me from the presidency of the company, claiming that I was unstable and unfit to lead. Nicholas's voice became as sharp as ice, all this while smiling at me at family dinners, while I trusted him as the only relative I had left in the world. Clara felt tears stinging her eyes. "Nicholas." "The worst part," he continued, as if he hadn't heard her, "was finding out that this had been going on for years. That every hug, every happy birthday, every moment when I thought I might still have a family was a calculated lie." He sat down again, closer to her this time, and Clara could see the lines of fatigue around his eyes. "So you understand," he said softly, "why the idea of a marriage based on mutual honesty, even if it's honesty about the absence of romantic love, seems more attractive to me than any union based on feelings that can be faked or manipulated." Clara studied his face, seeing beyond the mask of indifference he maintained. "And you don't think I would be able to betray you? You just told me about the biggest failures and losses of your life without me asking. You refused to accept my help until you were literally freezing to death on the street. You have more integrity in your little finger than most people I know have in their entire body." Clara's heart raced in a way that had nothing to do with the pregnancy. There was something in the way Nicholas looked at her, as if he really saw her. that awakened sensations she hadn't experienced since never. Ryan had been safe, familiar, based on a childhood friendship. But this intensity, this inexplicable connection with a man who should be a stranger, was completely new. "And what about the baby?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "He will be my son in every legal aspect. He will have my name, my protection, all the opportunities I can provide." Nicholas hesitated for a moment. "And maybe I need to learn to be a father as much as you need a husband." Clara closed her eyes, feeling the baby move in her belly as if reacting to the tension in the air. When she opened them again, Nicholas was watching her with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. "There's one condition," she said finally. "What if you ever find someone you truly love, someone for whom you feel what I felt for Ryan before he abandoned me? You promise me you will be honest with me, that you won't maintain a charade just for convenience." Nicholas tilted his head, considering. "And if you are the one who finds that someone?" Clara smiled for the first time since arriving at the mansion. A small but genuine smile. "I think, after everything I've been through, it will take me a long time to trust someone again." They remained silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Finally, Nicholas extended his hand. "So do we have an agreement, Clara Davis?" She looked at the offered hand, then at his face, and realized that perhaps, as insane as it seemed, this was her chance to rebuild a life, not just for herself, but for her son. And maybe, just maybe, for the lonely man in front of her too. "We have an agreement, Nicholas Valmont." When their hands touched, they both felt an electric current that neither was prepared to admit. The civil marriage took place on a gray Thursday, in a quick and formal ceremony at City Hall in downtown Manhattan. Clara wore a simple navy blue dress that Maria had bought for the occasion, and Nicholas wore a dark suit that cost more than she earned in an entire year. Only Maria and Nicholas's lawyer served as witnesses, and the judge conducted the ceremony with the bureaucratic efficiency of someone who performed dozens of weddings a day. When Nicholas slid the gold band onto Clara's finger, she trembled imperceptibly, not from the cold, he realized, but from the magnitude of what they were doing. In a matter of minutes, she had become Clara Valmont, wife of one of the wealthiest men in the country, owner of a last name that opened doors and commanded respect. Nicholas had made it clear that she could use any room in the mansion except his private study, and Clara established a simple routine. Waking up early, having coffee alone, Nicholas had already left for work, spending the mornings reading in the library or walking through the gardens, and having dinner with him when he arrived from the office, maintaining polite conversations about neutral subjects. The first days as husband and wife were a delicate dance of courtesy and respectful distance. Everything changed on a Tuesday in the early hours, 3 weeks after the wedding. Clara woke up with a searing pain across her abdomen, followed by a warm wetness between her legs that made her sit up abruptly in bed. At 8 months pregnant, she knew immediately what was happening, but it was too early, much too early. "Nicholas!" she screamed, her voice echoing through the dark hallway. "Nicholas, please!" He appeared in a matter of seconds, wearing only pajama pants, his hair disheveled from sleep. When he saw Clara doubled over in pain, her face as pale as paper, his expression transformed into a mixture of panic and steely determination. "It's the baby," she murmured between contractions. "He's coming, but it's too early." Nicholas didn't hesitate. He picked her up in his arms with a surprising gentleness for a man of his size and ran downstairs, shouting instructions for Maria to prepare the car. Throughout the drive to the hospital, he held Clara's hand, murmuring words of encouragement as she squeezed his fingers hard enough to leave marks. "Breathe with me," he said, his voice maintaining a calmness that contrasted with the desperation in his eyes. "Look at me, Clara. Only at me. You are strong. You can do it. At the hospital, while Clara was being rushed to the operating room for an emergency C-section, Nicholas found himself confronted with a reality he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in years, he couldn't control the situation. He couldn't use money or influence to guarantee that everything would be okay. All he could do was wait, pacing back and forth in the hallway like a caged animal, and confront the terrifying fact that he cared more about Clara and the baby than he had ever admitted. It was Maria who found him 3 hours later, leaning against the wall with his head in his hands. "Mr. Nicholas," she said softly, "Mrs. Clara is fine, and so is the baby." Nicholas raised his head sharply. "Are you sure? They're both okay?" The doctor said it was close, but yes, a healthy boy, although premature. He'll be in the NICU for a few days, but the prospects are excellent. The relief that washed over Nicholas was so intense that for a moment he couldn't move. When he finally entered the room where Clara rested, still drowsy from the anesthesia, he sat carefully in the chair next to the bed and simply watched her breathe. "How is he?" Clara asked with a hoarse voice as soon as she opened her eyes. "Perfect," replied Nicholas, and realized that his own voice was trembling. "Small, but perfect. The doctor said he'll be fine." Clara tried to smile, but her cheeks were wet with tears. "I was so scared." Without thinking, Nicholas reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The gesture was so intimate, so natural, that they both froze momentarily. "You were brave," he said softly. "Braver than I've ever seen anyone be." Something changed in the air between them at that moment. Nicholas's hand remained on her face, and Clara leaned slightly into the touch. For a few seconds, they looked at each other with an intensity that went far beyond a convenience agreement. "Nicholas," she whispered, "I—" The door opened abruptly, breaking the moment. A nurse entered, followed by a tall, elegant man whom Clara didn't recognize, but whose resemblance to Nicholas was unmistakable. "So it's true," said Ethan Valmont, his voice laden with poorly disguised disdain. "My dear brother really married a housekeeper." Nicholas stood up slowly, instinctively placing himself between Ethan and Clara. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about your little family emergency. I thought I'd come and offer my congratulations on the birth of your, what should I call him, stepchild?" The atmosphere in the room turned icy. Clara tried to sit up straighter in bed, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "Get out," said Nicholas, his voice low and dangerous. "Oh, can't I stay to meet my new sister-in-law?" Ethan approached the bed, ignoring Nicholas. "Clara, isn't it? What a common name. It must have been a shock to discover you'd landed such a big fish." "Ethan," Nicholas's voice was a pure threat. "Relax, brother. I'm not going to ruin your little fairy tale. In fact, I came to bring good news." Ethan smiled with a coldness that chilled Clara's blood. "The press is very interested in your sudden union. It seems someone leaked information about the circumstances of the wedding. The abandoned pregnant housekeeper who captured the heart of the reclusive millionaire. What a romantic story." Nicholas took a step forward, his fists clenched. "It was you. Me. How could you think such a thing?" Ethan feigned innocence. "But since you brought it up, I thought you should know that Focus magazine wants to do a special feature. From abandonment to the mansion, the American Cinderella. They're particularly interested in talking to the biological father of the child, Ryan Santos, I believe." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you—" "Oh, darling. Information is a very valuable commodity, and Ryan is more than willing to tell his side of the story. For a fair price, of course." Nicholas grabbed Ethan by the arm, his fingers digging into the expensive fabric of the suit. "You have 5 seconds to get out of here before I forget we're in a hospital." Ethan chuckled with a venomous smile. "Such hostility, Nicholas. I'm just trying to protect the family interests. After all, scandals can be very damaging to business." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Oh, and Clara, Ryan mentioned some very interesting details about your relationship. It seems it wasn't quite the innocent romance you described. Readers are going to love knowing the truth." After he left, the silence in the room was deafening. Clara was trembling, not from cold, but from a mixture of fear and humiliation that threatened to suffocate her. "Clara," Nicholas said softly, returning to the side of the bed. "What did he mean by—" "It wasn't how I told you," she interrupted, the words coming out in a desperate torrent. "Ryan and our relationship wasn't just based on love. He knew I had money saved for my brothers, and he convinced me to lend it to him, to invest in a business. He said he was going to multiply the money and that we could get married." Her tears were now falling freely. "When I found out I was pregnant, he had already lost all the money in gambling. That's why he abandoned me, not just because of the pregnancy, but because there was nothing left to take from me." Nicholas felt a surge of anger so intense that for a moment he couldn't speak. Not anger at Clara, but at all the men who had taken advantage of her kindness and trust. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was ashamed," she sobbed. "Because I was stupid enough to trust him with the only money I had to take care of my brothers. If I hadn't done that, maybe they would still be with me." Nicholas sat on the edge of the bed and without hesitation pulled Clara into his arms. She leaned against his chest and he could feel her warm tears through his shirt. "Listen," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Nothing that happened in the past matters now. Ethan may try to use this against us, but he doesn't know who he's dealing with." Clara raised her face to look at him. "Nicholas, if this hurts your business, if the press—" "To hell with the business," he said, with an intensity that surprised her. "And to hell with the press. You are my wife now, and this baby is my son. No one is going to hurt you while I'm alive." The way he said, "my wife and my son," made something stir in Clara's chest, something dangerous and powerful that she wasn't prepared to name. But as Nicholas held her, they both knew that the battle was just beginning. Ethan had laid his cards on the table, and the consequences of their marriage of convenience were about to become much more complicated than either of them had imagined. 3 weeks after Gabriel's birth, the media storm that Ethan had promised finally broke upon them with devastating force. The first article appeared in Focus magazine on a Monday morning, with a sensational headline that made Clara's heart stop. "The Valmont marriage hoax. Housekeeper scams millionaire with another man's baby." Nicholas found Clara in the living room, sitting on the sofa with the baby sleeping in her arms, and the magazine open in her lap, the pages trembling in her hands. The article was even worse than he had imagined. A venomous mix of half-truths and calculated lies, all designed to paint her as a manipulative opportunist. Clara Davis, former housekeeper, seduced the reclusive Nicholas Valmont, using an unwanted pregnancy as bait. Clara read aloud, her voice breaking. "Sources close to the family reveal that the young woman had been fired for inappropriate conduct and fabricated a story of abandonment to arouse the compassion of the lonely millionaire." Nicholas snatched the magazine from her hands and threw it into the lit fireplace. "It's a lie. All of this is a lie." "But isn't it? Clara raised her eyes, and he saw in them a deep pain that went beyond public humiliation. "I really did use my situation to get your help. I really did marry you for security, not for love." "How is that different from what they're saying?" "Because you were honest with me from the beginning," Nicholas replied firmly. "Because our agreement was mutual and transparent." But even as he spoke the words, he felt the foundation of his confidence begin to shake. Not from doubt about Clara, but from the haunting realization that his feelings for her had evolved far beyond what was safe or sensible. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists camped out at the gates of the mansion. The shares of the Valmont company began to fluctuate nervously on Wall Street. And then, on a Thursday that Clara would never forget, Ryan showed up. She was on the back porch, breastfeeding Gabriel and enjoying the few moments of peace that were still left in her days, when Maria appeared with a worried expression. "Mrs. Valmont, there's a man at the back door. He says he's the baby's father." Clara's blood ran cold. "Send him away." He said if you don't talk to him, he'll go straight to the journalists with the whole truth. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the inevitable weight of the past catching up with her. Let him in, but stay close. Ryan Santos walked onto the porch as if he owned the place, his eyes scanning the opulence around him with barely concealed envy. He had changed little, still the same handsome face that had captivated her, but now Clara could see the weakness in his chin, the greed in his eyes. "You're well settled in," he said, sitting down uninvited in the chair across from her. "Who would have thought that my Clara would become a lady?" "I'm not your Clara," she replied coldly, instinctively clutching Gabriel closer to her chest. "What do you want?" "I want to meet my son." Ryan reached out towards the baby, but Clara recoiled. "Come on, Clara, don't be like that. I know our separation was complicated, but we're adults." "Our separation?" Clara almost laughed at his audacity. "You abandoned me pregnant and penniless. You stole the savings I had set aside for my brothers." "I didn't steal anything. You gave me the money voluntarily." Ryan leaned forward, and Clara could smell alcohol on his breath. "But I'm not here to argue about the past. I'm here to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" "Your rich husband isn't going to want the truth about us coming out in the press, is he? About how you chased after me, about how you became obsessed when I tried to end our relationship, about how you lied about being on birth control to trap me with a pregnancy." Clara felt like she had been punched in the stomach. "That's a lie. You know that's a lie." "Do I?" "Because that's not what I remember." Ryan smiled cruelly. "And that's what I'm going to tell Focus magazine if we don't receive a settlement. We $50,000 a month, and I disappear from your life forever. Consider it advanced child support." Before Clara could answer, Nicholas's icy voice cut through the air. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Ryan turned sharply, finding Nicholas standing in the doorway of the porch. Even wearing just jeans and a casual shirt, he radiated an authority that made Ryan shift uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. Valmont, I presume. Pleasure to finally meet you." Ryan tried to smile, but it was obvious that Nicholas's presence intimidated him. "I was just talking to Clara about our son." "Your son?" Nicholas's voice was dangerously low. "Strange. As far as I know, you forfeited any right to that child the moment you abandoned his mother." "Well, legally speaking." "Legally speaking," Nicholas interrupted him, "Gabriel Valmont is my son. It's on the birth certificate, and if you try to suggest otherwise, you'll find that I have legal resources you can't even imagine." Ryan swallowed hard, but tried to maintain the bravado. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble. I just want what's fair." "Fair?" Nicholas laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think it's fair to blackmail a woman you abandoned pregnant?" "I'm not blackmailing anyone. I'm just clarifying some facts that might be of interest to the press." Nicholas took a few steps forward, and Clara saw Ryan recoil instinctively. "Let me clarify some facts for you. First, if you approach my wife or my son again, you'll find that I can make your life very uncomfortable. Second, if you sell any story to the press, true or false, I will sue you for defamation until you don't even have the shirt on your back. And third," Nicholas leaned over Ryan, his voice becoming a threatening whisper, "if I find out that you are spreading lies about Clara to blackmail our family, I will make it my personal mission to ruin you in ways you can't even imagine." Ryan got up quickly, trying to look defiant, but failing miserably. "You haven't heard the last of me. The truth always comes out." After he left, Clara remained silent for a long moment, looking at Gabriel, who was sleeping peacefully, oblivious to the drama unfolding around him. "He'll carry out the threat," she said finally. "He'll invent any story that harms you." Nicholas sat down next to her, studying her tense profile. "Clara, look at me." She reluctantly raised her eyes to meet his. "No matter what he says, no matter what lies he spreads, it doesn't change anything between us." "Doesn't change?" Clara laughed bitterly. "Nicholas, your company is already being affected by the scandals. Your clients are questioning your decisions. And now Ryan is going to invent even worse stories. Then let them invent. The intensity in Nicholas's voice surprised her. Clara, don't you understand? I don't care anymore what they think. I don't care about the gossip or the business or the opinion of society. He paused, as if he were about to say something that scared him. I care about you. I care about Gabriel. You two have become... He stopped, struggling with words he wasn't used to saying. You've become more important to me than anything I've built before. Clara felt her heart race in a dangerous way. Nicholas, I know our agreement was just convenience, he continued, his voice hoarse. But for me, that stopped being true a long time ago. They looked at each other for a moment, charged with tension, both on the precipice of admitting feelings that could change everything between them. But before either could speak, Nicholas's phone rang shrilly. He answered it with irritation, but his expression changed quickly. When? How many? He hung up and turned to Clara, his face pale. Ryan's article has already gone live. 3 television channels and 5 news websites. Clara closed her eyes, feeling as if the world were collapsing around her once again. And there's more, Nicholas continued, his voice tight. Ethan has called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. He's using the scandal to question my leadership in the company. The painful truth settled between them. What had begun as a marriage of convenience had turned into something much more dangerous. Their hearts were involved now, but the outside world was determined to destroy them before they could discover what they really meant to each other. And in the shadows, Ethan smiled, knowing that he had planted the perfect seeds for his brother's destruction. The board of directors meeting took place on a rainy Friday that seemed to mirror the chaos that had settled into Nicholas's life. Clara insisted on accompanying him despite his protests, and was now sitting in the anteroom of the corporate office, holding Gabriel while listening through the thick walls to the fragments of an increasingly heated discussion. The company's reputation is in tatters. Shares have plummeted 15%. We cannot allow reckless personal decisions. The door opened violently, and Ethan emerged with a victorious smile, followed by the other members of the board. His eyes met Clara's with a malice that made her shudder. Ah, Clara, how nice to see you here. I thought you'd be at home taking care of domestic duties. His voice dripped with condescension. But I suppose you must be curious about the future of your financial situation. Nicholas appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of contained fury. Clara could see from his tense shoulders that the news wasn't good. What happened? She asked softly. Vote of no confidence, Nicholas replied in a hoarse voice. Ethan managed to convince the board that my emotional instability and recent personal scandals make me unfit to lead the company. Ethan approached, savoring every word. It was a difficult but necessary decision. The company needs stable leadership, not someone who makes impulsive decisions based on, how can I put it, organs other than the brain. Nicholas took a step forward, but Clara stood up quickly, placing her free hand on his arm. It's not worth it, she murmured. How wise, your wife, Ethan continued. In fact, that reminds me, Clara, have you seen today's special edition of Focus magazine? It's absolutely fascinating. Ryan was very detailed in his revelations. Clara's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Ethan pulled a magazine from his jacket with the theatricality of a magician revealing a trick. The headline made Clara feel physically ill. Exclusive. She obsessively stalked me. Baby daddy reveals the scandalous secrets of the Valmont marriage. According to Ryan, Ethan read dramatically, Clara stalked him for months, showing up at his work, calling incessantly, even threatening to harm herself if he didn't stay with her. And when he finally managed to end the relationship, she deliberately stopped taking birth control to get pregnant and force him to come back. That's a lie, Clara exploded, Gabriel waking up in her arms and starting to cry. All of it is lies. Of course it is, Ethan smiled, but the point isn't whether it's true or not. The point is that 5 million readers believed it. And now, he paused dramatically, now we have photographs. Nicholas frowned. What photographs? Ethan pulled out his phone and showed the screen. Clara felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It was a photo of her and Ryan, taken secretly through the window of the porch, at the moment when he had leaned over her. From the angle of the photo, it looked like they were in an intimate conversation, perhaps even a romantic rendezvous. Interesting how images can be interpreted in different ways, Ethan murmured, especially when accompanied by the right story. Millionaire's wife secretly meets ex-lover while husband works. Nicholas snatched the phone from Ethan's hands, his eyes scanning the image with an expression that Clara couldn't decipher. "Nicholas," she said desperately, "you know that's not what happened. You were there, you heard everything." "Was I?" Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Interesting. So you knew about the secret meeting." The trap was closing around them, and Clara could see in Nicholas's eyes the first spark of doubt. Not doubt about her fidelity. She knew he trusted her, but doubt about whether her presence in his life was causing more harm than good. "Nicholas," Ethan continued with false fraternal concern, "you need to face reality. This woman is destroying everything you've worked for. First, she shows up out of nowhere with a convenient pregnancy. Then, ex-lovers start crawling out of the woodwork with sordid tales, and now secret meetings." He shook his head sadly. "I know you've become attached to her, but you need to protect our family's legacy." "Stop it," Nicholas said quietly, but Clara could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "I can't stop, Nicholas. Not when you're too blind to see what's happening." Ethan turned to Clara. "Tell me, dear sister-in-law, how long do you think it will be before the next revelation appears? Because Ryan mentioned that he has many more stories to tell, and I'm sure the investigators I hired will uncover even more inconsistencies in your version of events." Clara felt the tears burning her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Why are you doing this? What have I done to deserve so much hatred?" "You haven't done anything personally," Ethan replied with terrifying sincerity. "You're just a convenient pawn. Nicholas has always been very rigid in his moral principles, too difficult to manipulate or corrupt. But present him with a damsel in distress, and suddenly he becomes vulnerable, predictable." Nicholas took a threatening step towards his brother. "Ethan, the truth hurts, doesn't it?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Do you think you love her, Nicholas? Do you think she loves you? Or do you think she simply latched onto the first man rich enough to solve all her problems?" "Stop it!" Clara screamed, her voice echoing through the hallway. Gabriel was crying inconsolably now, sensing the tension around him. "Stop it! I'm not going to stand here listening to you destroy my family." "Your family?" Ethan laughed cruelly. "Honey, you don't have a family. You have a business arrangement gone wrong." The silence that followed was deafening. Clara looked at Nicholas, hoping he would defend her, that he would deny Ethan's venomous words. But he was looking at the floor, his fists clenched, battling internal demons that she couldn't see. "Nicholas?" Her voice was a broken whisper. When he finally raised his eyes, Clara saw in them a deep pain, but also a resolution that terrified her. "Maybe Ethan's right," he said slowly, each word like a dagger in her heart. "Maybe I've been selfish. Maybe I've dragged you into a situation that is hurting you and Gabriel." "No." Clara shook her head desperately. "Nicholas, don't let him do this. Don't let him destroy us." "I'm not destroying anything," Nicholas replied, but his voice was empty. "I'm trying to protect you, and the only way to do that is—" He paused, as if the words were physically painful. "Is to end this before it gets even worse." Clara felt as if the world had stopped. You're asking for a divorce? I'm giving you a chance to rebuild your life away from all this chaos. I'll make sure you and Gabriel have everything you need, but away from you." The words came out as a statement, not a question. Nicholas nodded, unable to look her in the eyes. "It's for the best." Ethan watched the scene with barely disguised satisfaction. "A wise decision, brother. Painful, but wise." Clara remained silent for a long moment, holding Gabriel, who had stopped crying and now looked at her with dark eyes that were a perfect copy of Nicholas's. When she finally spoke, Her voice was strangely calm. "You know what the difference is between us, Nicholas?" She stared him directly in the eyes. "When I was in the gutter, you reached out to me. Now that you're under attack, I would do the same for you, but you chose to believe the lies instead of fighting for the truth." She headed for the elevator but stopped before entering. "And Ethan," she turned to face him, "you got what you wanted, but remember one thing. Men like you always end up alone because eventually everyone finds out who you really are." As the elevator doors closed, Clara finally allowed the tears to fall. But even through the devastating pain, a part of her, the part that had survived so many betrayals and losses, was already planning. Ethan had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Outside the building, while waiting for a taxi in the rain, Clara looked up one last time. In the window of the office, she could see Nicholas's silhouette, as still as a statue. "Your dad's an idiot," she whispered to Gabriel, "but he's an idiot that I love. And somehow, we're going to make him realize that love is worth more than any empire one can build." The taxi arrived, and Clara got in with her son, leaving behind not only the building, but the life she had briefly called her own. But deep down in her heart, she knew this wasn't really goodbye. It was just the end of the first act of a story she was determined to rewrite. 2 weeks had passed since Clara had left the Valmont mansion, taking only Gabriel and a small suitcase with her clothes. Nicholas had insisted on transferring a substantial amount to her bank account, but Clara hadn't touched a dime. Instead, she had rented a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood, using the savings that still remained from her years as a housekeeper. The nights were the worst. Gabriel slept in the borrowed crib that the neighbor had offered, and Clara lay awake in the darkness, reliving every moment of the past few months. The pain of the separation was physical, a constant ache in her chest that made her question whether love was really worth so much suffering. But it was on a Tuesday morning, while breastfeeding Gabriel and absent-mindedly watching the news, that something changed. The news anchor was discussing the surprising restructuring of Valmont Enterprises when a sentence made her freeze. "Ethan Valmont has officially assumed the presidency of the company after the resignation of his brother Nicholas." In a statement to the press, Ethan stated that the transition was necessary to restore investor confidence after the recent personal scandals that had shaken the company's reputation. Clara turned up the volume, her heart racing. Nicholas had resigned completely. Later that morning, a hesitant knock on the door pulled her from her tortured thoughts. On the other side was Maria, the housekeeper, holding a shopping bag and with her eyes red from crying. "Maria!" Clara pulled her inside. "What are you doing here? How did you find me?" "Mr. Nicholas gave me your address," Maria replied, wiping her eyes with a tissue. He fired me yesterday." Clara felt like she had been punched. "He did what?" "Said he was downsizing the staff and that my services were no longer needed." Maria sat down heavily on the small kitchen chair. 40 years, Mrs. Valmont. 40 years I worked for the Valmont family. I took care of Mr. Nicholas since he was a little boy." Clara sat next to her, Gabriel sleeping peacefully in her arms. "That doesn't make sense. Nicholas would never do that to you." "Well, that's what I thought too." Maria sighed deeply. "But he's not being himself anymore. He doesn't eat, doesn't sleep. He's locked in his study drinking. Ethan goes there almost every day, and after those visits, Mr. Nicholas gets even worse." An alarm started to sound in Clara's mind. "Maria, tell me exactly what has been happening since I left." "Well, on the first day, he locked the door to your room and didn't let anyone in. Then he started working 16, 18 hours a day, as if he was trying to forget something. And then," Maria hesitated, "and then Ethan started showing up with documents. He said they were urgent legal matters that Nicholas needed to sign. He always arrived when Mr. Nicholas was most vulnerable." Clara felt a chill down her spine. "What kind of documents?" I don't know for sure, but I overheard Ethan talking on the phone with someone about transfer of power and legal custody. Maria leaned forward. Mrs. Valmont, I think Ethan is taking advantage of Mr. Nicholas's state to get things he would never get under normal circumstances. Clara's mind was racing. Maria, do you still have access to the mansion? I have the keys until the end of the week. I need you to do me a favor, a very important favor. That night, Clara called the only lawyer she knew, Dr. Robert Mendez, who had taken care of her parents' legal affairs years before. She explained the situation in broad strokes, omitting the most intimate details. Clara, said Dr. Mendez after listening to everything, if your suspicions are correct, Ethan may be committing several crimes: manipulation of a vulnerable person, corporate fraud, forgery. But how can I prove it? We need evidence. Documents, recordings, witnesses, and we need to act fast before he completely consolidates control of the company. Clara spent the next 2 days planning meticulously. Maria had managed to get copies of some of the documents that Ethan had taken for Nicholas to sign, and what Clara saw made her furious. Transfers of shares, changes to the will, even documents questioning Gabriel's legal paternity. He's trying to make sure Nicholas has nothing to come back to, she murmured to herself, studying the papers on the kitchen table. And he's using Nicholas's pain against him. But the discovery that really enraged her came in an unexpected call from an unknown number. Clara? The voice on the other end was hesitant, nervous. Who is this? It's Ryan. Look, I know you don't want to talk to me, but I need to tell you something. Clara almost hung up, but something in his tone stopped her. Speak quickly. Ethan contacted me 3 months ago, before you even left the Sterling's house. He knew about our history, about the money, about everything. Ryan's voice was trembling. He offered me $50,000 to make up those stories about you. Said it was just to shake up your marriage a little. Clara felt the blood boil in her veins. And you accepted? I was desperate, Clara. I owed money to loan sharks. They were threatening me. Ryan sighed heavily. But that was before I met the baby. Before I saw how much you really love him. Gabriel. What? His name is Gabriel. And he's not your son, Ryan. He never was. He never will be. I know. And that's why I'm calling. Ethan wants me to take another step. He wants me to file a paternity petition, claiming that Nicholas has prevented me from seeing my biological son. Ryan paused. Clara, if I do that, I can get joint custody. And Ethan said if that happens, he'll pay me another $100,000. The revelation hit Clara like a lightning bolt. Ethan wasn't just trying to destroy Nicholas professionally. He was trying to take Gabriel away from her too. Why are you telling me this? Because when I saw you that day, pregnant in the rain, I remembered why I fell in love with you in the first place. You don't deserve this, Clara, and that baby definitely doesn't deserve to be used as a pawn in Ethan's dirty game. Clara closed her eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Ryan, are you willing to testify about this? Officially, if you can protect me from the loan sharks. Yes, I have recordings of some of the conversations with Ethan. He was so arrogant, he didn't even bother to be discreet. After hanging up, Clara stood in the middle of the room, Gabriel playing on the rug at her feet, and felt something ignite within her. It wasn't just anger. It was a steely determination she hadn't felt since she had fought to keep her brothers together. Ethan had completely underestimated who she was. He had seen a pregnant, abandoned housekeeper and assumed she would be easy to break. But Clara had survived the death of her parents, the separation from her brothers, Ryan's abandonment, and countless humiliations. She was much stronger than Ethan had ever imagined, and now she had proof. The next morning, Clara dressed carefully, the only formal dress she owned, which she had worn at the civil wedding. She left Gabriel with the neighbor who had offered to help and took a cab downtown. Her first stop was Dr. Mendez's office, where she delivered all the evidence she had collected. The second was the police station, where she filed a formal complaint against Ethan for blackmail and fraud. And the third was the Valmont Enterprises building. As she rode the elevator that would take her to the executive floor, Clara took a deep breath. She could feel her heart pounding violently, but her resolve was unwavering. Ethan had played dirty, using Nicholas's pain and her love against both of them. But he had made a fatal mistake. He had believed she would give up without a fight. The elevator doors opened, and Clara walked towards the reception desk with the bearing of a queen going into battle. "I would like to speak with Ethan Valmont," she said to the receptionist, her voice clear and firm. "Do you have an appointment?" Clara smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Tell him Clara Valmont is here, and that I've brought some very interesting documents to show him." While she waited, Clara looked out the window of the high floor, seeing the city stretch out below her. Somewhere down there was Nicholas, probably suffering and blaming himself for decisions that had actually been manipulated by his own brother, but not for long. Ethan had declared war on her the moment he decided to use her son as a weapon. And Clara was about to show him that he had chosen the wrong enemy. The door to the presidential office opened, and Ethan emerged with a confident smile that faltered slightly when his eyes met Clara's. She was standing in the middle of the reception area, like a warrior, and there was something in her posture that made him hesitate. "Clara, what a unexpected surprise," he said, regaining his composure. "I thought you'd be busy taking care of domestic duties." "I am taking care of domestic duties," Clara replied calmly. "I'm protecting my family." Ethan laughed, but the sound rang hollow. "Your family? Honey, you don't have a family anymore. Nicholas made that very clear." "Funny you should say that." Clara opened the briefcase she was carrying, "because I have here some documents that tell a very different story." She placed the first pages on the coffee table in the reception area. Ethan approached, frowning, and his expression changed drastically when he recognized his own signature on the contracts. "Where did you get these?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that I have copies of all the documents you forced Nicholas to sign while he was in a state of emotional vulnerability. Transfers of shares, changes to the will." Clara paused, her eyes flashing dangerously. "And the receipts for the payments you made to Ryan." Ethan's face paled. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" Clara pulled out a small digital recorder. "Ryan was very helpful. Apparently, you were arrogant enough to be recorded in some of your conversations." She pressed play, and Ethan's voice echoed clearly through the office. "I need you to invent something more dramatic about Clara. The readers are starting to sympathize with her, and that doesn't serve my purposes." Ethan tried to grab the recorder, but Clara was faster. "Oh, don't worry. This is just a copy. The original is already with the police, along with the formal complaint for blackmail, fraud, and manipulation." "You don't know who you're messing with," Ethan snarled, all pretense of charm disappearing. "I can destroy you in ways you can't even imagine." "You already tried that," Clara replied with an icy calm, "and you failed, because you made the same mistake that all men like you make. You underestimated a woman who has nothing left to lose." At that moment, the elevator doors opened again, and Nicholas stepped out, accompanied by Dr. Mendez and 2 police officers. Clara felt her heart leap at the sight of him. He was visibly thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, but his dark eyes shone with an intensity she hadn't seen in weeks. "Ethan Valmont," said one of the officers, "you are under arrest for blackmail, corporate fraud, and coercion." Ethan looked from Nicholas to Clara, his expression twisting into pure fury. "You think this ends anything? I still have contacts. I still have influence. You have the right to remain silent," the officer continued, ignoring Ethan's protests. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." As Ethan was led away in handcuffs, he shouted one last threat. "This isn't over, Nicholas. You may have beaten me now, but our family is destroyed forever." When the elevator doors closed behind the police officers, a heavy silence descended on the office. Clara and Nicholas stared at each other across the space that separated them. Years of pain and misunderstandings hanging between them. "Clara," Nicholas began, his voice hoarse, Why did you resign?" She interrupted him. "Maria told me you handed everything over to Ethan." Nicholas ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Because I thought it was the only way to protect you and Gabriel. If I had nothing, Ethan wouldn't have any reason to attack you." "You idiot," Clara said, but her voice was filled with emotion, not anger. "Did you really think I cared about your money? That I had married you for your fortune? I didn't know what to believe anymore," Nicholas admitted, taking a hesitant step towards her. "Ethan was showing me evidence, making me question everything. And you chose to believe him instead of trusting me." The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Nicholas met her gaze with an expression of deep regret. "You're right, and there's no excuse for it." He paused, struggling with the words. "But Clara, you need to understand. I've spent my entire life being betrayed by people I trusted. My parents died and left me alone with responsibilities I wasn't ready to assume. Ethan, who I thought was the only family I had left, stabbed me in the back. And then you appeared, and for the first time in years I felt," he swallowed hard, "I felt hope, I felt love, and it terrified me." Clara felt tears burning her eyes. "Then why didn't you fight for us?" "Because I thought it was selfish of me to want to keep you close when my presence only brought pain and scandal into your lives." Nicholas took another step forward. "But you fought for us when I wasn't able to. You confronted Ethan, gathered evidence, risked your safety." "Because I love you, you stubborn idiot," Clara said, the tears finally starting to fall. "I love you. And I love the family we've built together, even though it started as a convenience agreement." Nicholas closed the distance between them in 3 long strides, wrapping Clara in his arms as if he feared she might disappear at any moment. "I love you too," he whispered against her hair. "I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. And I love Gabriel as if he were my own blood." They kissed there in the middle of the corporate office where everything had fallen apart, a kiss that sealed not only their reconciliation, but a promise that they would never again let fear or the manipulations of others destroy what they had built together. "There's one thing I need to tell you," Nicholas murmured when they broke apart. "Before Ethan was arrested, he had convinced the board to vote for my removal. But now that the truth has come out, they want you back." Nicholas nodded. "But I won't accept unless you agree. Our family comes first now. Always." Clara smiled through her tears. "Our family will be fine. Gabriel needs his father, and I need my husband. Even after everything that's happened, even after I doubted you." "Especially after everything that's happened," Clara replied firmly, "because now we know that our love is strong enough to survive any storm." 3 months later, Clara was on the balcony of the mansion, watching Nicholas play with Gabriel in the garden. The baby was growing quickly, and his first wobbly steps were accompanied by the enthusiastic applause of the adoptive father, who loved him unconditionally. Ethan had been sentenced to 5 years in prison, and the company was stronger than ever under Nicholas's renewed leadership. But more importantly than that, they had found something that neither of them had expected when they made that convenience agreement in the mansion's kitchen. They had found a real family. "What are you thinking about?" Nicholas asked, coming up onto the balcony with Gabriel in his arms. "I'm thinking," Clara said, pulling him closer, "that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as the worst. If I hadn't been kicked out that stormy night, if you hadn't been betrayed by Ethan, we never would have found each other." Nicholas kissed her forehead gently. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest man in the world to have found a woman brave enough to fight for our love, even when I gave up on it." Gabriel babbled happily between them, reaching his little arms out to Clara, and as she took him, the trio embraced there on the balcony, where everything had started with an act of compassion on a stormy night. Love had won, as it always should, and this time they knew it was forever.